So hello everyone, welcome back to Law on Obligations and Contracts. So ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon is about unenforceable contracts. So kung napanood nyo na yung previous videos natin, na-discuss na natin yung rescissible contract at ang voidable contracts. Now for this video, we will focus on unenforceable contracts. So ano yung mga unenforceable contracts? Number one is unauthorized contracts. Second one, those that fail to comply with the statute of frauds. Third, those where both parties are incapable of giving consent to a contract. Ayan, di ba? Yung number three, remember, doon sa voidable contracts, kapag yung isa is incapable of giving consent, the status of the contract is voidable. Pero if both of the parties are incapable of giving consent to the contract, then the status of the contract is unenforceable. Hindi siya voidable. Kasi dalawa sila na incapable of giving consent. So, Article 1403 provides for the contracts which are considered to be unenforceable. So, first, those entered into in the name of another person by one who has been given no authority or legal representation or who has acted beyond his powers. So, the person mentioned here is the agent. Kung for example, nag-authorize ka ng person to act in your behalf or nag-hire ka ng agent, di ba sabi natin kailangan meron kang document evidencing the authority. It must be in writing, di ba? Sabi ng batas. So kapag wala kang document, okay, kapag wala kang authority to do acts in favor of the principal or in behalf of the principal, then any contract entered into by the agent without authority or legal representation is unenforceable. So, Article 1404, unauthorized contracts are governed by Article 1317 and Principles of Agency in Title 10 of this book. Okay? So, hindi natin extensively pag-usapan to. Basta, kapag ikaw ay agent at wala kang authority, any acts executed by you beyond your authority will be unenforceable. Second, those that do not comply with the statute of frauds as set forth in this number, in the following cases, an agreement hereafter made shall be unenforceable by action unless the same or some note or memorandum thereof be in writing and subscribed by the party charged or by his agent. Evidence, therefore, of the agreement cannot be received without the writing or a secondary evidence of its contents. Okay, let me introduce to you first kung ano itong principle, ano yung common denominator dito sa unenforceable contract, especially dito sa principle of statute of frauds. Meron kasi, di ba generally sabi natin, yung contract, consensual in nature yan, di ba sabi natin? Meaning to say, contracts are perfected by mere consent. However, there are certain contracts kasi na sabi ng batas, if these contracts are not put into writing, pwedeng magkaroon ng fraud. Mag-perpetuate ng fraud. Kasi nga, the contracts are not in writing, pwedeng kalimutan lang ng other party, di ba? So para maiwasan ng fraud at maiwasan yung makakalimutin na tao, baka makalimutan natin yung pinag-usapan natin. So dapat, it must be reduced into writing, into some note or memorandum. Ayan. Subscribed, meaning signed by the party charged or by his agent. Okay? Para yun yung maging evidence ngayon ng kanyang obligation. So, pero hindi naman lahat ng contracts should be put into writing. Kasi nga sabi natin, generally, consensual lang. Kung ang law sabi ng batas is kailangan in writing, saka pa na yung contract should be in writing. And an example is under paragraph 2 of Article 1403. So ano yun? Number 1 is an agreement that by its terms is not to be performed within a year from the making thereof. So for example, yung agreement nyo, hindi siya mape-perform within a year. Example niyan ha is construction. Obligation to construct a commercial building. Sabihin natin 4-story commercial building. And it will be constructed for a period of 2 years. So meaning to say, hindi siya matatapos within a year. So para maging enforceable yung contract na yan, kailangan it must be on some note or memorandum, or it must be in writing. Otherwise, if that agreement is not in writing, the status of the contract is unenforceable. You cannot enforce it. So hindi mo pwedeng sabihin sa kabilang party na, oy, construct mo na to. Pwede niyang i-deny yan kasi wala namang kasulatan. Kasi requirement sa batas na dapat in writing siya para enforceable siya. Letter B, a special promise to answer for the debt, default, or miscarriage of another. Anong example nito? Sige, ako magbabayad para sa kanya. Paano ngayon? Hindi mo nilagay sa kasulatan. Tapos ngayon, nag-due na yung utang, pumunta ka sa kanya. Nag-collect ka, tapos i-deny niya ngayon. Wala naman akong pinirmahan na dokumento para maningil ka sa akin. Kahit na nag-promise siya before para bayaran niya yung utang ng ibang tao, kailangan nag-secure ka sana ng document, pinapirma mo para mabind mo siya. So you cannot enforce an obligation against a person, especially na special promise to answer for the debt, yung kanyang obligation. So hindi pwede yun. You cannot enforce the contract. Letter C, an agreement made in consideration of marriage other than a mutual promise to marry. An example nito is yung sa marriage. Example, M agrees to build a house worth 5 million pesos for W if W will marry M. This must appear in writing to be enforceable unless M ratifies the agreement. The statute applies even when the promise to build the house is made by a third person to W. Okay? Kumbaga, merong consideration yung marriage, no? Another example niyan, I will send you to school. Papag-aralin kita, pakasalan mo lang ako. Ganon. So, kailangan yung obligation na i-enroll ka niya sa school, dapat pala yun, i-put into writing. Okay? Para ma-enforce mo yan. Ngayon, pagkasal na kayo, baka sabihin mo, ay, nakalimutan ko na yan. So, pwede niya lang i-deny yan, di ba? So, dapat, you should put it into writing. Pero kung yung obligation mo, yung promise mo na pakasalan siya, ibang storya yon. Hindi yun kailangan in writing. Okay? An agreement for the sale of goods, chattels, or things in action at a price not less than 500 pesos unless the buyer accept and receive part of such goods. Ayan, in short lang nito is, if yung value ng goods, chattels, or things in action, binenta mo, yung value niya hindi at least 500 pesos, it should be in writing in order for it to be enforceable. Example, if I wanted to sell to you my car, that is, di ba, shuttle. Ay, palitin na lang natin yung value. Let's say, cellphone. Benta ko sa iyo yung cellphone ko worth 10,000 pesos. Okay? Para maging enforceable yung contract na yan, kailangan, it must be in writing. Okay? So, ano ang mangyayari ngayon kung hindi siya in writing? So, sabi ko sa'yo, ibibenta ko sa'yo itong cellphone ko worth 10,000 pesos. Wala tayong kasulatan. Ngayon, sabi mo sa akin, kunin ko na yung cellphone. So, pwede kong i-deny. Pero sabihin na, wala naman tayong kontrata. Wala akong pinirmahan na contract, no, for you to claim the cellphone. So, pwede yun. Kasi unenforceable yung contract. Kasi nga, it was not in writing. Okay? Agreement for, ano pa? Lease for the leasing of real property for a period longer than 1 year, or for the sale of real property or of an interest therein. Ayan. Itong nasa letter A, paghiwalayin natin yung leasing tsaka yung sale of real property kasi iba yung rule nila. Now, agreement for the leasing of real property. Take note, real property ha, meaning to say immovable, yung mga lupa, bahay. Okay? So, what if for example, meron kang lupa, pinarentahan mo. Yung lease period is, let's say, 2 years. Sabi ng batas, you should put it in writing for it to be enforceable. Okay? So, nangako ka na ipaparenta mo sa kanya itong lupa mo for 2 years. Ngayon, bumalik siya sa'yo. Sabihin niya, magrerenta na ako ng property mo. Start na tayo. Ngayon, sabi mo, dininay mo, naparenta ko na sa iba. Sabi niya, bakit? Di ba na-promise ka sa akin na sa akin mo yan iparent? So, pwede mo sabihin na wala naman tayong kontrata. Hindi naman tayo nag-sign ng contract, di ba? O, gano'n. So, meaning to say, he cannot enforce the contract against you kasi wala namang written instrument. Okay? Pero kung 1 year lang yung period ng lease, hindi yan kailangan nakakontrata. Kasi nakalagay dito, for a period longer than 1 year. Okay? Or for the sale, ito, pangalawa, for the sale of real property or of an interest therein. Kung nagbenta ka ngayon ng lupa or bahay, kailangan mo yan i-put into writing. Okay? Kasi kapag hindi mo yan nilagay sa papel, it is an unenforceable contract, status niya. So, mangyayari, kahit na nag-promise ka na ibibenta mo sa kanya yung lupa mo, pero kung hindi naman yan naka-reduce into writing, he cannot go to you and enforce the oral agreement. Kasi binenta mo sa iba. So, para maprotektahan yung would-be buyer, he should require a written instrument from the seller. Kasi real property yung pinag-uusapan, di ba? So, yun yung mangyayari, yung effect, no, kapag hindi siya nakaput into writing. Take note here that regardless of the value of the property, kahit na 1,000 yung real property na yan, it doesn't matter. Basta real yung property, lupa at saka bahay, kapag nagbenta ka, kailangan talaga in writing. Otherwise, unenforceable yung contract. And we have a special provision, no, for sale of real property. Aside from the fact that you cannot enforce it against the person, any contract entered into involving a real property such as sale is void, no? Void siya kapag hindi siya in a public instrument. Okay? Remember that. Letter F, a representation as to the credit of a third person. Ang example nito is, for example, ikaw yung parang accommodate sa person. Ngayon, basahin natin itong example. D is seeking a loan from C. T represents to C that D is solvent and has a good credit reputation. Parang, parang nag-vouch ka ng credibility, no, ng debtor. A representation, ni-represent mo yung debtor sa creditor. Sinabi mo na good payer ito siya. Ayan. So, Relying upon the representation, C extends a loan to D, who actually is insolvent. Yun pala, insolvent. The representation of T, which was made to induce the extension of credit to D, must be in writing to be enforceable. Here, there is no promise by T to answer for the debt of D. Note that there is no agreement involved. Ayan. So para mahabol mo yung nag-represent, kailangan the representation must be in writing. Otherwise, you cannot enforce it against him. So pwede niyang i-deny, no? Okay, so take note that itong mga kontrata under the statute of frauds applies only to executory contracts and not to partially or completely executed contracts. Ano ibig sabihin yan? Kapag na-execute mo na partially yung contract, it doesn't matter na kung hindi nakaput into writing yung contract. Example, nagbenta ka kayo ng lupa, binayaran ka na ng half partial payment. Tapos ngayon, pagkatapos niya magbayad ng partial payment, nag-demand siya ngayon na i-deliver yung lupa. Ang sabi mo, hindi pwede kasi wala tayong kasulatan. Hindi siya in writing. Pwede ba yun? The answer is no. Kasi nagbayad na po siya ng partial payment. Meron ng partial execution ng contract. With more reason kung yung kontrata is completely executed. So you can no longer enforce, you can no longer raise the ground of the ground provided under the statute of fraud para maiwasan mo yung liability. Kasi nga, statute of frauds applies only to executory contracts. Yung mga kontrata na hindi mo pa na-perform, ipe-perform pa lang. Okay? Remember that principle. So may remedy ba kung ang contract is unenforceable? The answer is yes. It can actually be ratified by the parties. Anong example? Yung doon tayo sa agreement in consideration of marriage. Ayan, mas madali ito. Example, papag-aralin kita, pakasalan mo lang ako. Let us say, for example, hindi naka-put into writing yung obligation na papag-aaralin niya yung partner niya kung pakakasalan siya. Hindi nakalagay sa kasulatan. Verbal lang. Nung dumating ang time na kinasal sila, of course, yung partner niya, sabi niya, gusto ko na mag-aral, i-enroll mo na ako. So ngayon yung partner niya naman, pinag-enroll niya, in-enroll niya. So, ratified na yung contract, okay? Na-remedyohan na siya. So, hindi na pwede na erase mo later on na unenforceable yung contract kasi pinag-aral, in-enroll mo na, di ba? So, ratified na siya, no, by that way. So, pwedeng i-ratify din yung unenforceable contracts, okay? Pero, ang question dito, meron bang prescriptive period? Walang prescriptive period na pinag-uusapan sa unenforceable contract kasi nga, in unenforceable contract, the only remedy that you can do is not to enforce it. So wala kang gagawin. So therefore, kung wala ka namang gagawin, edi walang prescriptive period, di ba? Meron lang siyang corrective measure, no? Yung ratification, no? For failure to object, no? To the presentation of oral evidence to prove the same or by the acceptance of benefit under them. Ayan. So, pwede pala siyang i-ratify. So, third na ground for unenforceable contract is those where both parties are incapable of giving consent. So, kung both of them ay minor, so, ang status ng contract is unenforceable, hindi voidable kasi both of them. So, hindi pwedeng ma-enforce between them. Okay? Ang example nito is, kunyari, magkalaro, no? Yung bata, 8 years old, tapos yung kapitbahay niya, 8 years old din, naglalaro sila, tapos sabihin niya, benta ko sa'yo yung house and lot namin. O, yun, ganyan. Pareho silang minor. So, they are both incapable of giving consent, di ba? So, therefore, the status of the contract is unenforceable. Ayan. Take note that unenforceable contracts cannot be assailed by third person. So only the parties can question the contract on the ground that it is unenforceable. So that ends our discussion for unenforceable contracts. So see you on our next video for the last defective contract. Goodbye.